Hello YouTube, hello Twitch. Hope you're all doing well. And as promised, my last out of the 3 overviews of tech tree ships. And today we are going over the topic destroyers. I might do submarines as well if people really want to see it. Depends on them. CVs I can't really do because I'm too inexperienced to tell you exactly which one to go for, what are the main strengths and so on. I think they're all broken by design. But that's a different story. So if you really want to see a submarine overview as well, which is going to be very short, feel free to ask in the YouTube comments. But let's move on now with our last overview, which is destroyers. Also, if I sound a bit sick, I'm sorry, I'm still having a cold and hope it's going to be better soon. We're going to start with Japan. You have 2 lines. You have pretty much the oldest DD line in the game, which is Shimakaze. That's the left line. And those TDs are fully focused on torpedoes. Now, the Japanese torpedoes are a double-edged sword. On the one hand, they do a lot of damage, which at first, for a new player, sounds amazing. And the ships have really good concealment, which is also a good trait of them. But the problem, what people don't see, and it's kind of a little value, but it changes the whole thing about the whole line, is that the torpedo dictability is very high. That means people, even without hydro, have high reaction times or long reaction times to react on your torpedo salvos, which makes them kind of not as good as you would wish like. I wish personally the line would get a bit buff with the torpedo stealthiness increased. So overall, Shimakaze, not really a good line in my opinion. You rely on torpedoes, which is already very, very questionable. And then, while they hit hard, the concealment of the torps is pretty bad. So, not a big fan of the line. I don't think it's particularly good. On the other hand, you have the Harugumo line, which focuses mainly on guns. And that is a completely difference of day and night. You will hear it a lot today during my overview that I prefer guns over torpedoes immensely. I think gunboats are usually far superior than torpedo boats because you have way less RNG influencing your gameplay, and the amount of playstyles you can have instead of just dumping torps is immensely bigger. So with the Harugumo line, you also get okayish Japanese torpedoes, less of them, but in comparison you get insane main gun firepower. Harugumo, especially Harugumo, Kitakaze and Akizuki are getting the 100mm Japanese main guns, which shoot very rapidly and you do a lot of damage with them. Also, they have pretty decent base span with 30mm. So if you are starting with the Japanese line, I would definitely recommend you going with Harugumo. It's a far better line than Shimakaze line. And yeah, you will hear it a lot. Guns are superior over torpedoes in my opinion. Moving over to the US, we have also one of the older DD lines, and that's Gearing. Now the Gearing line with Fletcher, Benson, Mayhem, Farragut and so on used to be a very good gunboat. Used to be, like years ago. The thing is, there was only Shima and Gearing, and Gearing was more the gun-focused one, while still having decent torpedoes, and Shima was the torpedo-focused one. Now it's a bit different. It's kind of a jack of all trades, in a way, is that the Americans have really, really good smoke screens. Like, they're the longest in the game. Sorry. And they have decent main guns, while also having pretty decent torpedoes. The problem is you don't have stuff like heals. Your main guns have very bad arcs, so aiming them at 8 kilometers and more is really challenging. And your HP pool is also not that high. You do have decent concealment, and your torpedoes are actually pretty decent as well. I would even go so far saying that the American torpedoes overall are better than the Japanese ones. Yes, they do a bit less damage, but they have way better concealment, which means reaction time is lower on them. Overall, I still think Gearing is a decent ship, although heavily power crept, and I would wish it would get a buff, either in a form of getting a heal, or getting better shell arcs, because the shell arcs are really frustrating to play with, especially in comparison to most other DDs. Yeah. Still, for beginners, a very good line. You have very long smoke screens. Overall, okayish. Nowhere near the best anymore, but still recommended for beginners, because with the long smoke screens you can play around quite a bit. Moving over to the Russians, we have 2 lines. we have the Delny line and the Grozovoi line. The Delny line is giving up concealment for pretty amazing gunpowder and speed. Downside is, again, you lose on the concealment and you don't have a smoke screen. So it's not bad, although I would straight up say French DDs like Lebert are way better, but it's not bad. It's not beginner friendly either as well, because they're very sluggish to use. So I would rather recommend you go for this line here with Oknovoy, Udaloy and Grozovoi, because this line has okayish concealment, but you have a heal and you have a smoke screen. So overall that's way more beginner friendly instead of this one. Now I don't say Delny is a bad ship. I don't think Delny and Tashkent are bad ships. In fact, I think they're pretty alright. But it's definitely not a beginner line. So rather go with Grozovoi, Udaloy and Oknovoy. They're far more beginner friendly and far more forgiving thanks to having smoke screens and heals, and also okayish torpedoes. Plus, both are really having good gun performance. Not the best reload, but definitely really good shells and super easy to aim. So for beginners, more obviously go for the Grozovoi. If you're more experienced, you can play Delny. I don't think it's a bad ship. Again, I don't think this is a bad line, but it's very hard to play. And if you go over to here, to the German DDs, we're gonna have two interesting ones. Now, the German DD line is also, the Z52 line is also one of the DD lines that has been the longest in the game. Also one of the more older ones. And basically it was all about having a hydro. Having a hydro and a smoke on DD is usually a very powerful combination. The problem is Z52 also didn't age that well, in a way that it is very sluggish, it's quite big. You do have an amazing 6 km hydro, but the guns are kind of lackluster because you have 32mm pen on the HE, which sounds good on paper, but your HE alpha is very low. And on the other hand, you have very high penning or decent penning AP shells. In theory, the problem with these AP shells though is, while you want to use them on destroyers, they don't have improved AP angles. So basically, you can only utilize them at a slight angle, the maximum damage on DDs, because if enemy DDs show broadside, you will overpen, and if they angle too much, you will just ricochet. So having that strong 8P is more helping you against cruisers and BB upper belts than actual DDs. And for DD combat, you do have the smoke screen. However, the DPM is not that high, and I personally think the line could either use a reload buff or maybe giving it improved AP angles. The problem with improved AP angles is it can make the line easily super strong, way too overtuned. But I just don't like the fact that you want to use the AP, but you can't because you overpen on most broadsides on DDs. And then you shoot HE, which is also weak on the alpha, and you just don't trade very well. You have to rely on your hydro and smoke so hard, and if they just realize it and play around it, you can't really fight them in the open too well. So that's why I'm not the biggest fan of this line. I feel like it needs some changes regarding that. Then we have the Elbing line. Now this is very interesting because it's completely different in a way than most DDs work. Some people would even say it's a light cruiser line because they're so big. The Elbing line is about having absolutely atrociously hard-hitting AP guns with slow reload but extremely high pen. So basically you have improved AP angles and you are pretty fast with the ships, but they're very sluggish, big, and you don't have a hydro unlike Z52. However, these guns are not meant to necessarily destroy destroyers very well, although they do it. Like, you can win engagements with Elbing against DDs just because of your HP pool, and especially if enemy DDs do mistakes like angling, because that means your shells will arm fully. But these things excel at fighting cruisers and even to an extent battleships, although the main thing is Elbing can citadel cruisers at insane ranges. Most cruisers up to the max range, other cruisers to 10-ish km. It's a very powerful ship, and people really underestimate what kind of insane salvos it can print out on destroyers, on cruisers. You also have the benefit of being the only DD line, the D line, not DD, but DD line, that has better armor than other DDs. Most DDs have, let me check, what is the armor? I think either 19 or 16 millimeter. 19 millimeter everywhere, or 20-ish. Meanwhile, the Elbing line has actually 25 millimeter. That is a big important factor to know, because it means you're pretty much, besides some exception like Harugumo, resilient to HE. In a big part of your ship, your main belt is resilient to HE damage, and people need to actually shoot AP on you to do damage, which gives you also a pretty big tankiness factor. So, again, not the easiest line to play, the Elbing line, but I definitely enjoy it. It's one of the most fun lines for me in the game. I'm personally a bit biased towards this as well, because I just love playing Elbing, of course. But I do think it's definitely powerful enough in the current meta, unlike Z52. And I definitely recommend it to you if you have more experience in the game. Now we're gonna move over to the UK line. And there we have Daring. Now, Daring used to be probably the best DD in the game for me, because it could literally do everything. It has really good gunpowder. It has really good. The line has really good. No, it has really good gunpowder. It has decent torpedoes. It has a heal. It has short smoke screens, but a lot of them. And it has a free cam hydro for self-protection. So it kind of can do everything on its way. However, there's a big downside on Daring nowadays. And that's the only one thing it's really bad at, or the entire line, and that's speed. Nowadays we get a lot of battleship lines, cruiser lines whatsoever, that are just straight up outrun Daring. Like, Daring speed with 35 knots something back in the day wasn't a big thing, because most BBs were like going 30-ish knots. But nowadays a lot of the new lines just straight up overtake Daring, and you cannot even outrun them anymore, which is a big factor. And all the other new DD lines are also way faster. So Daring is heavily power crept when it comes to speed. That doesn't mean it's a bad ship. No, it's still excellent. It still can do pretty much every job. The only big downside or downfall at the moment is its speed. I still think it's very capable, and you can play around the speed part. You still have all the other gimmicks and utilizations around that you can use to make it work. But the speed is really slowly but steadily hurting the ship, the old speed. However, good line, definitely recommended, especially if you're new to DD play. Try it out, you can do so much with these DDs. Lightning, Jutland, Jervis, Icarus, the whole line is fun to play, and definitely recommended by me. Now we're moving over to the French, and there we have two lines. Cassard is one of the newer lines, by the way. We have Kleber, which is considered to be one of the best tier 10 DDs in the game, and in general, the Kleber line plays completely different than what you usually know from DDs. These DDs have high concealment, which means they're spotted quite easily, but they have insane gunpowder, and they have a reload booster. They have a reload booster consumable, which basically cuts your reload by half for a certain amount of time, giving you insane DPM during that time. They're also extremely fast, and basically what people tend to do with them is they try to harass enemies completely, surprise DDs, and play with the speed. If you ever faced one of these things, especially from Gepard onwards, in a battleship, you know how frustrating it can be to shoot them. They're constantly spotted most of the time in a battle, but it's very hard to hit them, because with the speed boost and the engine power they have, they can literally duke shells. You shoot them, they break. They are standing on the spot, you shoot them, they accelerate, they reverse. Basically, you can play around very much with your speed and be an absolute annoyance while not being actually hit, and at the same time pump out insane amount of damage. I don't think the line is beginner friendly. I don't think it's beginner friendly at all, because I see a lot of people just going full speed, hoping it's work, and then they die. Which works against potatoes who can't aim, but if people just roughly know how to lead their shots, you will get smashed for it. One more thing that's also pretty good about the line is that you have French saturation. That means when you get spammed with HC, you take overall way less damage over time than other ship class, than other DDs. But yeah, I still don't think it's beginner friendly. But once you are having the hang of the game, they're definitely one of the strongest lines in the game and a nightmare to fight. On the other hand, we have the Cassard. The Cassard is going a different way. It has a bit better concealment and gives a bit up of the gunpowder, or actually quite a lot depending on which ships you see, for torpedoes. So these are basically the torpedo ships of the French, which still have decent speed and okayish gunpowder, but they're more focusing on torpedoes. Now, I don't think this line is bad at all. I think this line, in fact, is pretty good as well, because while you don't have a smoke screen, or you don't particularly have the best torpedoes, you have really good torpedoes, and you still have decent gunpowder, plus speed. So you don't give up so much like a Shimakaze, which purely focuses on concealment and torpedoes. And in that way, the Cassard line is pretty nice. Also, one more thing to notice though, it's the only DD line we have currently in the game that has one special gimmick about it. And that is, it depends how the torpedoes travel. The distance travels, how much damage they do. Up to 7 kilometers, they do the full damage. I think they have like 24,000 damage, which is insane. Up to that range, they do the full amount of damage, 7 kilometers. Over that, they will gradually over time, over distance, lose damage. And I think the max range the ship has is 13.5. Maybe it's more or less, I'm not sure right now. But in the end, it means you get rewarded for being closer to your target to do more damage with your torpedoes. Means if you just torp on long range and hit them, you will do way less damage than you would actually be closer. Which forces you, or gives you the incentive to play more aggressive. And I kind of like that, because it doesn't mean they're just sitting at the back and spamming torpedoes. And yeah, the Cassard line is also pretty slow without speed boost. Okay, it's pretty slow without speed boost, but with speed boost, it's pretty fast, apparently. Good. Moving over to the Italians. Oh. Now this is a double-edged sword. I personally think Regolo line is a lot of fun to play, but it's not that amazing. Basically, what you do is, you have a DD line that is pretty fast, having very slow torpedoes, and having very low main gun range. However, you get sap on your main guns, and the alpha is insane. Plus, you have exhaust smoke generator, which means when you activate the smoke screen, it is very short, but it follows your ship. Which means once you press it, for example, you can YOLO a battleship, or you can disengage with the smoke screen, or try to get closer to a DD knife fighting him. And that gives you kind of a fun play when you do it very, very decently and you can plan ahead. It can be a very fun line to play. Now, as I said, it has very, very low main gun range. We're talking about 9 km, 8 km and so on, which is like super duper low. That has a big advantage though as well. It sounds only like a downside, but it also means one big advantage, and that means your main gun bloom, when you shoot, is only 9 km wide as well. That means if you knife fight the DD, you annihilate him, he dies, you're instantly unspotted, because your bloom is only 9 km and there might nobody be near DDD, and that means you can instantly go dark. So it's not always good to have a long main gun range on destroyers, because it also means your chance of disengaging after an engagement can take way longer. So I personally like the line that it doesn't have so much range. And when it comes to dealing with battleships and so on, then the main guns are not coming in too handy. Then you rely more on your torpedoes. But however, With the smoke screen, you can get very close to battleships, surprise them with a torpedo spread, maybe shoot a bit with the main guns as well, and still sink them. Overall, an extremely fun line to play in my opinion. Is it effective? Is it competitive in 2024? I don't think it's a particularly good line. I think it still can work, but it's definitely a lot of fun to play. I personally love playing Regolo, but I don't see it in the top 5 DDs at all. No, I don't see it there. But I still think it's a fun line to play. And that's something that you should always pay attention to as well, because it's not always about, or for me, it's not always about having the best ship or something. Sometimes I just want to enjoy. Sometimes I just want to play something that is just cool to play. And Regolo is one of those lines for me. Definitely fun factor wise recommended. Efficiency wise and easy to play, not really. You will need a lot of situational awareness to make it work. But definitely a fun line to play. Moving over to Pan Asia, we have the Yuang line with Kunming as a super ship. Now these ships have they're pretty much Russian, British, and American ships. You can see here, for example, the Yuang looks a bit like Gearing, Chomu looks like Fletcher, this looks like Benson, Gajah looks like Jervis. But they have one big difference towards all the other lines. They have deep water torpedoes. They don't have normal torpedoes, they have deep water torpedoes. And basically, the difference between a normal and a deep water torp is, or in case of these deep water torps is, they cannot hit other destroyers. They're very hard hitting and they're very stealthy, so your reaction time is super low unless you have a Hydra running. But you cannot hit destroyers. You can hit cruisers, you can hit battleships, you can hit carriers, and you can hit cruisers, battleships, and carriers. You can also not hit submarines with them, by the way. What do I think about this line? I think it's still pretty solid. I also think it's a bit power crap when it comes to gun DPM. But the deep water torps are still absolutely amazing and still super powerful. And the main guns, while the reload is pretty long, or longer than other DDs in comparison, they still can be decent. Like Yuang, for example, got nerfed multiple times on the gun DPM, unfortunately. So nowadays it's nowhere near as good as it used to be. But still would recommend it. Especially for beginners, I still think this line is pretty good. And now one more thing which is very funny about the line, and a lot of people, personally for me, I love it. From T8-1 on, you can switch the smoke screen for a radar. Personally, I only do it on Yuang because you can get the gun DPM with the leg mod quite high. But it's kind of a bit of a fresh air, and it's fun to play radar gunboat Yuang in my opinion. But for normal taste people, of course, you can run smokescreen. It's still a solid line. Torpedoes are really strong. Guns are not bad. Don't get me wrong. They're okay. Concealment is also decent. So overall, a pretty beginner-friendly line as well. And decent to play. Now we're moving over to the European line. And there we have two. We have Holland and Gdansk. Two very, very interesting lines in a way, because I know a lot of people like Holland. Like, they would even go saying so far it's absolutely amazing. But there's a bit more behind it. I personally think Holland is an average boat. I don't think it's more or less. People are overrating its AA quite a bit. Basically, the Holland line is all about having super fast torpedoes with fast reload, but low damage output. And also having exceptionally good AA. Now, Holland does have the strongest AA of all tier 10 DDs, that is true, but by no means it will effectively protect you from a CV player. It heavily depends how good the CV player is. If he's a noob, you will be protected and the AA can help you. If he's more experienced in the class, he can still completely ruin your game. The main guns are okay, they shoot fast, but somehow they don't really hit that often. I cannot describe it, but I feel like Holland's gun dispersion is very questionable. That's just subjective now. Maybe I'm still coping about it, but I just don't hit with the Halland as good as with Smalland, for example. But yeah, basically, I think the line is overrated. The community loves it because it says, hey, it has super strong AA. Meanwhile, the AA only really works against incompetent or not very good CV players. On the other hand, you get a heal, you get a speed boost, you have super fast torpedoes, you have okayish guns, so it's not bad, but I think it's very much overrated in the community. And then we have, on the other hand, the Gdansk line. Now this line is a completely other part. Now this line is completely different towards the Halland line. The Gdansk line is fully about gunpowder, smoke, and radar. Yes, you have a very powerful combination. You have radar, you have a short duration radar and the smoke screen, which is absolutely amazing. I think this line is super powerful once you get to the radar. You have insane gun DPM and okayish torpedoes. The only big downsides you have is you can only shoot HE, and you have very questionable concealment. You have very high concealment. However, that concealment is not the biggest problem because for that you have the radar to spot the enemy DDs. I think this is one of the strongest lines in the game. I really like playing Gdansk. I think overall this is really, really good. And I would take it over Halland at any day. It's not easy to play though, again, because if you potato your radar, you're kind of blind and you're having that super high concealment, which can bite you in the back. Overall though, one of the best lines also in the game. I think it's very, very powerful and definitely recommended by myself. It's enjoyable to play as well. More for experienced players though as well. And I think that's it when it comes to tech tree destroyers, right? Yeah, we don't have any tech tree destroyers left. So all I gotta say now is I hope you enjoyed this little overview, what line you should go for, what I would recommend you, what are their special gimmicks about them. And if you liked the video, be sure to comment, like, subscribe on the YouTube channel. It really means a lot to me. When you want to have a submarine guide, although that's gonna be a submarine overview, even though that's gonna be very short, let me know in the comments, and I wish you an absolutely amazing day. Your Trendless. Bye bye.